Foggy Bottom Line Media. Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. This is Stan Scott with Foggy Bottom Line Media. I wanted to really quickly talk about the SAVE Act, the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility SAVE Act, House Resolution 22. Scott and I just finished a three-part series on American elections, how they work, whether they're hackable at the machine level, and then how you would influence an election if you wanted to. So take a look at the last couple of episodes of Two Crusty Old Combat Soldiers with a Microphone to get that. Some of the short clips from those episodes have gotten some attention on Instagram and TikTok. So take a look at those if you have accounts on those social media platforms, and then go take a look at us on YouTube. And when you do that, please don't forget to subscribe, follow, click the like button, leave a comment, let us know where you're from. So conservatives are pushing this so-called SAVE Act because they believe, or at least they say they believe, that non-citizens are voting in large enough numbers to influence elections. Some will say that this is why Democrats want open borders, is so that they can bring all these people in who will just go vote for Democrats, presumably because that's who let them in. Not sure how that logical chain works. But this law would require voters, when they register to vote, it would require everyone to demonstrate citizenship. So when I show up to register to vote, I would have to show a birth certificate or a passport. There's some other things, other documents you can use that I'll talk about here in a minute. Okay. Now, this is a solution in search of a problem, because the fact is that voters, non-citizens do not vote in any large numbers. When this does happen, it's typically a mistake, because when they get a driver's license, they're also registered to vote. They fill out the form. Maybe they don't speak the language that well. They don't understand what they're doing. But then they get registered, but very, very, very few of them actually do show up to vote. And it's mostly confusion when that happens. The Heritage Foundation, which is not the most liberal organization in the world, did a study on this, and they found that something like 0.00001% of voters are non-citizens. So it's minuscule. It doesn't affect elections. It's not a problem. But what this law would also do is it would create new barriers between the voter and the ballot box, and I'll talk about that. So I posted about this on Foggy Bottom Line, so you can read the post and get some more of this if you prefer to read it, but I'll talk about it. So basically, Section 1 just names the law, the SAVE Act. Section 2 defines the various forms of documentation, okay? And, things like a form of identification consistent with Real ID of 2005. I've got a Real ID driver's license, and I had to show citizenship to do that, which means the Real ID driver's license I already have would be good to show citizenship. And a non-citizen who has a driver's license, even a Real ID, would well, I don't think they can get a Real ID. A non-citizen, it would show that they're a non-citizen on that driver's license. Of course, a passport. You could use a military identification card along with military records showing citizenship. So when I enlisted in the Army in 1982, I had a birth certificate. You don't have to be a citizen to enlist, but my original military records document that I showed a birth certificate and that I am a citizen. Okay. Other valid government issued ID cards, if it shows that the applicant's place of birth was in the U.S., this is most likely to be a tribal document, American Indian. Okay. Any kind of valid government issued photo ID, if you present it with a series of other documents, like a certified birth certificate from a state, local government, or tribal government, an extract from a U.S. hospital record that created at the time of birth that shows that the birth took place in the U.S., or an American Indian ID card issued by Department of Homeland Security with the classification Kilo India Charlie. So these forms of documentation would demonstrate that you are a citizen when you register to vote. Now, all that's great when you're doing it in person, okay? But note a couple things. A birth certificate alone is not valid without a valid, is not good enough without a valid government ID card. This means that some women whose birth certificate shows Jane Doe, but they married John Smith, and now they call themselves Jane Smith, and their driver's license says Jane Smith. If that person shows up with a birth certificate and a driver's license that do not match, that person could have a problem registering to vote. They're a citizen, they've got the birth certificate, but they can't demonstrate that that birth certificate belongs to them because of the name difference. Now, presumably, you could bring your wedding certificate, your marriage certificate, to show that name change, but there's no provision for this in the law. So it's not clear if that would be the way to fix this. And it's not too late. Senate hasn't passed this yet, so it's not too late to amend it. Okay. More generally, despite conservative talking points around, well, you have to have an ID to get on a plane, you have to have an ID to buy a beer, you have to have an ID to do blah, blah, blah. All that's true, but government IDs are not so ubiquitous as people think. Not everyone has them. Homeless people often do not have them. And they also don't have access to their birth certificate. People with dementia who are old in a nursing home, right? Maybe they shouldn't be voting, but that's a different discussion. But they don't necessarily have access to the documents they need to demonstrate that they're citizens, okay? But most people have an ID card of some kind. Most people do not have a passport, and there's a lot of people out there who do not have a birth certificate, and some who even can't get one. It wasn't terribly unusual before, like, let's say the 50s, for people to be born in rural areas and no birth certificate was created at all, right? So if you were born in a very small town in Oklahoma in 1948 and you were born at home and the nearest hospital was 40 miles away, you might not have a birth certificate to get. There may not be one at all. That person still, however, should have a right to vote. And there actually is a provision for this in the law later on, okay? So I guess my question, at least partially here, is under this SAVE Act, these women who have mismatched birth certificates and ID cards, a lot of those women are going to be conservative, and I would suggest you might find, if you looked at the data, that most are conservative, because conservatives are more likely to get married. They're more likely to get married at a younger age, and when they do get married, they're more likely to take the husband's name if they're a woman. So I think this may backfire on the conservatives who, to the extent this is an effort to reduce the amount of number of people who can vote and who can vote, then that could backfire on them. Folks, they say this is about non-citizens voting. That's not a problem. But if you think it ever could be a problem, okay, maybe we need to do something like this. But what this is really going to affect is people who either don't already have this stuff, or people who can't easily get it, or poor people who simply can't afford the time and money required to get the birth certificate from the hospital in Little Rock where they were born, right, which could cost $50, or to get the other identification or passport they need. Passport's a couple hundred. So poor people, this creates a barrier. Now, if the requirement is for something other than something they have to pay for, if government's going to issue an ID for this, okay, makes sense. But now you have to think about, what about the people who want to register by mail, right? It's one thing if I'm doing it while I do my driver's license. If I remember, I just carry my birth certificate with me, I'm good to go. And I did that if I went to get a real ID card. In fact, I had to go back because the first time I forgot to take the birth certificate or passport, so I had to go back. But if you're getting a driver's license with a real ID and you're already a citizen, you register to vote when you get the driver's license, you got your birth certificate, you're good to go. But if you're registering by mail or online, now there's another step. And the law requires that people who register by mail or vote online, they have to bring the paperwork, the documentation of citizenship, to the polls the first time they vote. And this could be problematic because, a lot of people will show up to vote not realizing they need to do it. They don't understand the system yet, or they just plain forget because they don't understand the system yet. And then they show up, they don't have it, they wait in line, they get kicked back, and now maybe they do a provisional ballot and come back later, but now they got to go back later. And maybe they say, you know what, this is not worth it. One vote, it's not going to matter anyway, so what the heck. The point is that these kinds of things create barriers to voting and reduce the number of people to vote. Okay. Now the rest of this is basically admin stuff, right? It's authorizing use of the information in the voter registration to prosecute, which makes sense if you think you're going to prosecute people who are voting illegally. It Section 4 exempts the thing from the Paperwork Reduction Act, which also makes sense. And then it places the effective date is upon enactment. Now, a couple more problems I'd like to touch on with this, okay? One is that the states will administer this. In some states, and I think Scott mentioned this in one of the Two Crusty Old Combat Soldiers episodes, about the states will implement this, which means the rules are going to be different. And you could end up with 50 different sets of rules with respect to things like, would I have to go back and register again? Because, or am I grandfathered in? So if people who are already registered don't have to re-register, then they're grandfathered in, then all these people that the Republicans are claiming have been registering and voting when they're not citizens, it doesn't take care of that problem. And this is a signal that they know that's not really a problem, right? Or they would have specified that everybody has to go back and re-register. But this will be up to the states, and some of the states will require that, and some of those will not, okay? There's a provision in here that Homeland Security has to notify election officials when someone is naturalized and becomes a citizen. And it's curious to me that the law does not require Homeland Security to notify election officials when someone has been stripped of their citizenship or voluntarily gives it up or loses the right to vote because of a felony conviction, right? So if the idea here really is to keep people from voting who are not eligible to vote, then you would think those provisions would also be included in the law, which is another sign that this is really just about making voting more difficult. But all of this really raises the key question here, and that is, why not simply give everyone a passport-like identification document at birth? And a lot of European countries do this. I know Germany does this. When you're born, you get an Ausweis, a Personalausweis, or identification, right? And this identification shows that you're a citizen, okay? And you would have to change it from time to time. You know, you might want to require a new one at certain ages, like 12 or 15, certainly 18. And so anyone who shows up with one of these documents that has, right, I'm a citizen, I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I'm over 18, I get to vote. Okay? And you'd also have to make changes when you move so that you get, in the right district, the right voting precinct. Okay? So if I move, I notify the post office that I've moved, right? So the post office presumably keeps a database of where we are. I know companies like Experian do that. These credit rating agencies have a good track of where you've lived, right? So we could create a document that everyone gets at birth when you're a citizen. You make changes from now and then to add an addendum that you pass the driver's license test, add an addendum that you pass the flying certification, so it's okay for you to fly airplanes. Sailing, I have a good friend who's a certified sailboat captain. right? So he would have that on this thing. And you would just have to amend it from time to time when you moved. And we're a mobile society, so that's a little bit problematic. But the post office is an easy way to do this. Now, conservatives have historically resisted this, and for good reason. They're worried about the government tracking everybody. They're worried about the government knowing where everyone is. And this is one reason why a lot of people don't register to vote, because they don't want to tell the government where they live. Sometimes because they don't want to ever sit on a jury, but sometimes because they're just worried about the government knowing where they are. They want to be as off the grid as possible, right? So I understand this, but we're already in a society where if the government wants to know where I am for some reason, all they have to do is look at my cell phone pings, and that's easy enough to get with a subpoena. Some of these tech companies give up that information without even being asked, or without a subpoena at all. All you got to do is ask, right? So in the social media society where we live in now, where it would be virtually impossible to live completely off the grid anyway, we're already being tracked. I'm not sure that's a good reason, but it is a step in the direction that ICE is taking us now, where as we're walking around, your papers, please. You got to carry this ID document with you everywhere you go. And then someone walks up and says, I need to see your papers to prove you're a citizen. Okay. So if this thing is restricted to things like driving a car and sailing a boat and flying a plane and voting, buying beer, getting on an airplane, then it's fine. And we already have that, folks. I mean, your social security number is already the way they track you for these kinds of purposes. So I don't think that's a valid response to this question anymore. But this would simplify matters. In fact, you get this document, this passport-like document, when you're born. You amend it from time to time when necessary. New photograph when you're 15, another new photograph when you're 25, right, and so forth. Right. My driver's license photo was 10 years old. So, and then when it's time to vote, you just show up with that, and you're automatically registered. You don't have to register to vote, except to the extent that you've told the post office your new address. Okay. So no more voter registration. Everybody has a document. Anyone who wants to vote can just show up, show this document with the address addendum, and vote in the election. And I don't know why we don't do that. If we really think this is the problem, we can do this in a way that makes it easier for people to vote, not more difficult. Okay? Now, there'd be some lag time. We could start with brand new babies now, but I would have to go out and get one of these, right? Unless you're going to count my real ID, which you could. Okay? So I just thought I'd run down the SAVE Act. It's a very short law. You can read it. I'll include a link to this in the description for this video. I'll include a link. I've included a link in the Foggy Bottom Line post. You can look at go look at the column on the essay on Foggy Bottom Line about this for a little bit more detail. But at the end of the day, there's a way to do this without making it harder to vote, and that's what we ought to do. So, thanks for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. I appreciate your comments. We did get some on a couple of these short clips, and we've responded a little bit. But like we said on the other yesterday, we're not going to get in the mud with people who only want to call us lying pieces of whatever. So go ahead, go to the YouTube channel, subscribe, like, comment, tell us where you're listening from. We're curious about that. Let us know if you have any thoughts. Happy to get in a back and forth, but if the best you got is you're just lying about this, or an assertion with no source, it's not worth it. So take care, everyone. This is Stan Scott with Foggy Bottom Line Media with a quick update on the SAVE Act. Hope you all are well. Take care, and we will see you next time around. Carry on, everybody. This is Stan Scott with Foggy Bottom Line Media, and I'm out here.